Christmas night had always been quiet in our house. The scent of pine from the tree mingled with the faint sweetness of baked cookies cooling on the counter, a warmth that pressed softly against the edges of the room. The lights strung across the tree flickered gently, casting soft reflections on the polished floorboards and stretching shadows into long, lazy shapes. I wandered slowly through the living room, my fingers tracing the familiar textures. The smooth wood of the table, the rough weave of the rug beneath my feet, the cool glass ornaments that hung delicately from the branches. Each sound, the quiet hum of the heater, the faint creak of the floorboards, the occasional rustle of the curtains, seemed magnified, more deliberate, as if the house were attentive to every movement I made. The presents under the tree sat wrapped in colorful paper, ribbons curling at the edges. Their bright shapes were ordinary, familiar, yet tonight they seemed different. There was a stillness in the air, subtle and insistent, as though the packages were waiting, patient, deliberate, holding something back. Mom and Dad moved quietly around the room, placing a few last decorations, murmuring softly to each other. The routine of our family was calm, warm, predictable. Yet there was an unspoken rule I had learned long ago: we never opened presents after midnight. The rule had always been quietly respected, without argument, but tonight, for the first time, I felt a subtle tension behind it. A faint, insistent weight pressing against the edges of the ordinary warmth. I sat on the rug, staring at the stack of packages, noticing their textures. The smooth wrapping paper, the faint ridges of the ribbon, the subtle indentation where hands had pressed and folded the corners. I could feel the soft warmth of the living room beneath my fingers, the faint chill from the window brushing against my face, and the gentle flicker of the tree lights across the walls. The clock ticked steadily toward midnight, each second deliberate, echoing softly in the quiet. The shadows seemed to stretch, leaning closer to the tree, to the presents, to me. I tried to remind myself that it was all ordinary, safe, familiar. It's just a rule. It's just a tradition. The words felt thin against the quiet pressure in the air, the subtle insistence that tonight was different. I could hear the soft murmur of Mom adjusting ornaments, the faint clatter of a dish in the kitchen, the hum of the heater blending with the quiet rhythm of the house. And still, the presence remained, patient, deliberate, waiting. Each ribbon curl, each crease in the paper, each small fold felt meaningful now, as if the packages themselves were observing, attentive, quiet but insistent. I pressed my hands to my knees and leaned closer to the tree, trying to focus on the ordinary. We never open presents after midnight. We always wait. Everything is fine. Yet the subtle tension pressed softly against my chest, a quiet weight of anticipation that I could not explain. Something in the rhythm of the house, in the stillness of the night, seemed deliberate, inevitable, waiting for the hour to arrive. The clock ticked on, second by second, shadows shifting, the air feeling heavier with each passing moment. I could sense the rule I had always followed: never open presents after midnight. Not as mere tradition, but as something patient, deliberate, and quietly necessary. And I realized, slowly, that this night, the weight of that rule pressed more insistently than ever before. I leaned back, feeling the textures beneath my fingers, listening to the subtle creaks of the floor, the hum of the heater, the distant rustle of wind against the window. I did not understand why the rule existed. I had never questioned it before. But now, as the hands of the clock inched closer to 12, the ordinary warmth of the room was threaded with a quiet insistence, patience, waiting, and an inevitability that I could feel pressing softly against the edges of my awareness. And then, finally, I heard it, the faintest sound of a clock's minute hand, moving toward midnight, deliberate, patient, and unyielding. The presence under the tree seemed to lean into the shadows, waiting. And I, sitting on the rug, feeling the textures of the world around me, understood that when the hour arrived, nothing would be ordinary. The clock hands edged closer to midnight. I remained on the rug, tracing the worn weave with my fingers, feeling each thread as though it could anchor me to reality. The presents under the tree, still wrapped and neat, seemed heavier. Not physically, but in the way they occupied the room, patient, deliberate, waiting. A faint draft brushed across the tips of my fingers, coming from the slightly open window. The curtain fluttered, soft and almost imperceptible. I shivered, not from cold, but from an unfamiliar awareness pressing into my chest. The warmth of the living room was still there, but it no longer offered comfort. It felt distant, filtered through something subtle but insistent, like the house itself was watching, waiting, counting. Mom hummed softly in the kitchen, a calm, ordinary sound, yet it pressed strangely against my awareness. Dad's footsteps moved deliberately on the wooden floor, echoing softly in the quiet house. And still, I felt it, the almost imperceptible weight of anticipation surrounding the presence. I glanced at the stack beneath the tree. One ribbon seemed to have shifted slightly. Just a curl, a small tilt. My fingers itched to adjust it, to restore order, but something inside me hesitated. "It's nothing," I whispered. "It's just paper, just ribbons. It's ordinary." But my chest felt tight, the faint pressure persistent, unyielding. A subtle sound caught my attention, a soft scrape from the corner of the living room, as if a chair had shifted. My eyes scanned the shadows. Nothing moved, yet I could feel the presence of that small change. My heartbeat quickened, not in panic, but in quiet recognition. The house had changed, just slightly, just enough to make me notice. I pressed myself lower to the rug, listening intently. The hum of the heater, the faint ticking of the clock, the distant rustle of the curtains, they all seemed sharper, more deliberate. I whispered to myself again, repeating the words like a charm. "We never open presents after midnight. We wait. Everything is fine." And yet, the words did not settle the tension. I could feel a pattern emerging, subtle but insistent. The shadows lingered a fraction longer, the air pressed softly against my skin, and the stillness of the presence felt more deliberate. It was not fear yet, not panic, just the quiet insistence of something patient, deliberate, inevitable. I tried to rationalize it. It's just tradition. It's just a family rule. Nothing will happen. But the slight tilt of a ribbon, the soft scrape in the corner, the way the shadows pooled, these small anomalies wove themselves into my awareness, stitching unease into the familiar fabric of the room. Time slowed. Each second stretched, deliberate. The clock ticked steadily, each faint click echoing through the quiet house. I pressed my hands to my knees, feeling the texture of the rug beneath my fingertips, listening to the subtle movements around me, cataloging every sound, every shift in light, every faint smell of pine and wax. And then I heard it, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound, like paper brushing against paper, coming from the presence. My eyes darted to the tree. Everything was still. Every package remained in its place, neat and undisturbed. Yet I felt it, that quiet, patient insistence, the unmistakable awareness that something was watching, waiting, deliberate and inevitable. I swallowed hard. My chest tightened. The ordinary, familiar warmth of Christmas Eve was gone. Something subtle, deliberate, and unavoidable had settled in its place. And I understood, with a quiet, suffocating certainty, that the rule, never open presents after midnight, was not just tradition. It was survival, order, inevitability. The minute hand moved closer. Shadows deepened. The house exhaled softly, pressing its presence into every corner, every texture, every thread of my awareness. And I waited, small and quiet, feeling the weight of something patient, deliberate, and unyielding, pressing softly into my chest. The first crack in my sense of ordinary Christmas had appeared, and I knew it would not be the last. The days that followed passed quietly, almost uneventfully, yet I could not shake the memory of that night. The soft scrape of a chair, the slight tilt of a ribbon, the subtle pull of the shadows, they lingered in my mind, patient and deliberate. Every ordinary sound, every texture I touched, carried a faint, persistent tension, threading itself into the rhythm of the house. I moved through the room slowly, noticing the familiar textures in unusual ways, the smooth polish of the table, the weave of the rug beneath my fingers, the delicate edges of ornaments. Each small detail seemed charged now, deliberate, waiting. The presents under the tree appeared unchanged, yet I could feel their presence, patient and silent, in a way I had never noticed before. At night, I lay awake, listening to the quiet house. The hum of the heater, the distant tick of the clock, the soft rustle of curtains, they all carried subtle patterns I had not registered before. I catalogued them silently. The rhythm of footsteps on the wooden floor, the sway of shadows across walls, the faint metallic tang in the air. Every repetition reinforced something in the house, something patient, deliberate, inevitable. I began to notice the patterns more acutely. The shadows under the tree seemed to linger longer in the same spots. A faint scrape would always follow a subtle sound. The air pressed differently against my skin at certain times. I tried to explain it away. Imagination, fatigue, excitement. But the quiet pressure persisted, threading into my chest and my awareness with each passing moment. Even during the day, the tension lingered. The tree remained standing, the presence neat and undisturbed, yet every room seemed quieter, heavier, more attentive. The ordinary warmth of home felt filtered through something deliberate. I could feel it pressing softly, patiently, insisting on observation. I whispered to myself often, "It's just a tradition. It's just a rule. Nothing will happen." Yet the words felt thin. The house responded not with sound, not with movement, but with an undeniable sense of presence. Every small anomaly, repeated in its own quiet way, reinforced the inevitability of the rule. We never open presents after midnight. I found myself revisiting the hiding place by the tree, crouching low, tracing textures, cataloging shadows, listening. The faint scrape of the floorboards, the subtle shift of a ribbon, the almost imperceptible change in air pressure, it all carried meaning now. The ordinary had been threaded into something deliberate. Each repetition, each quiet observation, reinforced it, tightening the invisible rhythm that ran through the house. By the time midnight approached again, I could no longer distinguish ordinary from deliberate. Every sound, every texture, every subtle shift was part of the pattern. I understood, without surprise, that the rule was not optional. The presence in the house was patient, deliberate, inevitable. And I, by following it quietly before, had become part of its rhythm. I pressed myself to the rug again, tracing threads beneath my fingers, feeling the cool floor through the fabric. The shadows pooled, long and patient. The presence remained under the tree, still and waiting. And I knew, with slow, suffocating clarity, that the pattern would repeat, patient and deliberate, again and again. I waited, and the house waited with me. The days leading up to the next Christmas Eve were quiet, almost painfully ordinary, yet the memory of the previous night's tension lingered in my chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every subtle shift of shadows, every whisper of wind against the windows pressed against me, patient and deliberate. The ordinary textures of the house, polished wood, soft rugs, smooth ornaments, suddenly carried weight. I tried to convince myself that it was all imagination. It's tradition. It's just a rule. Nothing will happen. But the quiet pressure in the house, the lingering presence around the presence, refused comfort. I felt it in my chest, in my fingertips, in the slow, steady rhythm of the walls around me. Each evening, I would sit near the tree, tracing the edges of the gifts, the folds of the ribbons, the textures of the wrapping paper. I catalogued every small detail. The tilt of a bough, the subtle indentation in the wrapping, the way a shadow stretched across the floor. It was all deliberate. It was all part of something patient, inevitable, that had woven itself into the very rhythm of the house. I whispered to myself in the empty rooms, "I'm overthinking. It's nothing." But the words felt hollow. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Air shifted subtly. The warmth of the house seemed distant, filtered through an unseen insistence. The presents were waiting, patient and deliberate. The house was patient and deliberate. And I began to understand that the rule, never open presents after midnight, was more than tradition. I tried to speak to my family, to ask them if they felt it too, but the words would not form. They moved through the house with ordinary calm, unaware of the subtle tension pressing in the corners, threading itself into every sound, every shadow, every breath. Only I noticed, only I felt it, and the more I tried to rationalize, the stronger the tension became. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of the curtains, each faint scrape beneath the tree reinforced it. The ordinary became deliberate. The familiar became something patient, deliberate, and inevitable. I began to feel a creeping guilt. Should I have questioned the rule? Should I have resisted? Should I have acted differently? Each thought pressed softly, inexorably, weaving itself into the fabric of my awareness. I understood that my compliance, my quiet observation, my silence, all of it, was part of the rhythm. My choices, or my lack of them, carried weight. Even the small comforts of home, the warmth, the smell of pine, the soft flicker of the tree lights, felt distant, filtered through subtle insistence. I could feel the pattern consolidating around me, threading through the house, through the presence, through the very shadows themselves. I pressed my hands to the rug beneath me, tracing threads, feeling the cool floor through the fabric. Every detail, every sound, every shift in shadow reinforced the inevitability of the rule. I understood, suffocatingly, that the ritual was patient, deliberate, unavoidable, and I realized with quiet, sinking clarity, when midnight arrived again, the choice would fall on me. My actions, or my inaction, would matter, and the consequence would be irreversible. I waited, and the house waited with me. Christmas Eve arrived again, quiet and patient, with the familiar scent of pine and candles pressing softly against the edges of the rooms. The lights on the tree flickered gently, casting long shadows across the polished floor. The presence sat beneath the branches, neat, patient, deliberate. I moved through the living room slowly, touching the familiar textures, the weave of the rug beneath my fingers, the smooth wood of the table, the edges of the ornaments. Each small detail seemed amplified tonight, charged with the quiet insistence of something unseen, something inevitable. Mom and Dad moved about, humming softly, arranging last-minute decorations. Their calm, ordinary movements pressed strangely against me. I could feel the tension in the room, subtle, persistent, deliberate, and it seemed to gather around the presents. The rule whispered in my mind, "We never open presents after midnight." I had promised myself I would follow it. Yet, as the clock hands inched toward midnight, a small, almost imperceptible curiosity rose within me. A single ribbon on the largest present under the tree had come loose, curling differently than before. My fingers itched to touch it, to straighten it, to peek beneath the paper. I hesitated. My rational mind whispered warnings. No. You know the rule. You cannot open them. It is not time. But the habit of observation, the quiet need to understand, pressed softly against my thoughts. I reached toward the ribbon. Not to open the present, just to adjust it. To see. To check. My hand trembled slightly as I brushed it, feeling the subtle texture of the paper. The room felt quieter, the shadows longer, the air heavier. My chest tightened. The ordinary warmth of the house felt distant now, filtered through something patient, deliberate, and unavoidable. The clock ticked closer to midnight. The presence beneath the tree seemed to lean subtly into the shadows, patient and waiting. I pressed my hand a fraction further, feeling the crease of the paper, the slight give of the box beneath. And in that simple, quiet movement, so mundane, so ordinary, I crossed a line. It was not dramatic. No alarm rang. No shout. No sudden movement. Only the subtle, patient weight of inevitability pressed against me. Shadows pooled slightly deeper, the faint chill in the air brushed against my fingertips, and I understood with quiet, suffocating clarity that my small choice, my curiosity, my hesitation, my inaction in restraining myself, had consequences. Mom's soft humming continued in the background. The heater's low hum filled the room. The tree lights flickered gently. Everything appeared unchanged. Yet the rhythm of the house, the patient insistence of the shadows, the deliberate weight of the presence, had shifted. I had shifted it. I withdrew my hand slowly, pressing it against the rug beneath me. My chest tightened with quiet tension. The rule had been broken, not with intent, not with force, but with a small, simple act. The consequence pressed softly, invisibly, against the edges of my awareness. The clock ticked steadily, inexorably, toward midnight. I pressed my hands to the rug, tracing threads beneath my fingers, feeling the cool floor through the fabric. The ordinary had changed. The presence threading through the house, patient and deliberate, had been reinforced by my own small choice. I waited, and the house waited with me. Midnight passed without fanfare. No sudden noise, no dramatic flash. Only the soft tick of the clock, the faint hum of the heater, and the gentle flicker of the tree lights. The presence remained under the tree, neat, patient, deliberate, but something had changed. I moved through the living room slowly, feeling the subtle shift in the air. The house felt heavier, quieter, more attentive. Shadows pooled in the corners differently than before, stretching, lingering, as if the spaces themselves remembered my small, seemingly insignificant choice. Mom and Dad carried on, humming softly, setting out plates and snacks, their ordinary movements deliberate and calm. The warmth of the room remained, yet distant, filtered through the weight of inevitability. I realized that nothing looked different. Nothing seemed altered, but everything had shifted. The largest present, the one I had touched, seemed almost aware. Its edges caught the light differently, shadows pooling around it as though acknowledging the action that had disturbed the quiet pattern. I pressed my hands to the rug beneath me, tracing familiar threads, feeling the cool floor, trying to anchor myself in ordinary texture. No one spoke of it. No one acknowledged the subtle tension that hung in the air. The rule, never open presents after midnight, had not been enforced with words or gestures. Yet the consequence pressed quietly, undeniably, against the edges of the room. I understood it not in sight or sound, but in the weight pressing against my chest, the subtle insistence threading through every shadow and every faint shift in air. I sat in silence, tracing the rug, listening to the faint tick of the clock, the hum of the heater, the occasional rustle of the curtains. The house exhaled softly, deliberately. It was patient. It was waiting, and I understood, with a slow, suffocating clarity, that this quiet pressure would linger. Always. My siblings moved through the room, unaware, ordinary. They did not notice the shift. They did not see the subtle tension. Only I felt it, pressing in corners, pooling in shadows, threading itself into the air, into the textures, into the rhythm of the house. I looked at the tree, at the presence, at the flickering lights. Everything seemed unchanged. Yet I knew that the small, quiet choice I had made had mattered. Not in drama, not in spectacle, but in inevitability. Time stretched. The air was still. The room was quiet. And in that quiet, I realized I would never unmake the choice. The house would remember. The shadows would remember. And the pattern would continue. I pressed my hands into the rug, leaned back slightly, and let the quiet settle around me. The ordinary warmth, the sense of pine and cookies, the soft flicker of the tree lights, all pressed softly against the edges of my awareness. I understood that next year, when the lights flicker, the tree glows, the presence sit patient and deliberate beneath its branches, the ritual would return. And I would wait, and the house would wait with me. The clock ticked. I did not move, and the house remained quiet.